Good afternoon, all. Welcome to our webinar. Thanks for attending. We'll just give people a couple of minutes to join the webinar. It's just ticked over 1 o'clock. Nice to see so many attendees joining. So welcome those that have just joined. It's just ticked over 1 o'clock, so we'll get going in a minute or two once give everyone a chance to come in, especially if they're having their lunch as they tune into this webinar. I'll introduce ourselves again soon, but I'm Jonathan Prendergast, Technical Director from the Business Renewable Centre. And you can also see Bridget, the Project Officer from the Business Renewable Centre. Today, no Jackie, just the two of us plus Daniel from Cairns Regional Council. Jackie's not attending this webinar today. But Bridget, myself and Daniel here to host the webinar. Just give it 1 more minute to let people come in. Hope you're all having a good Tuesday start to the week and start to the year. We've got the Q&A function enabled today. We encourage questions as we go, and we'll try and get to some of them as we go. And also some of them at the end as well. We use UTS's Zoom system, and they don't enable chat for some reason for all their lectures and so on. So chat's not enabled today for everyone, as far as I know. And let me just double check that. It says I can message everyone here, so maybe that's changed, Bridget, I'm not sure.
So we can message the chat, but attendees won't be able to message chat.
Right.
So if you do have a question, pop it in the Q&A and we'll be sure to answer it.
And while you're unmuted, we're recording this. Is that right, Bridget? So it can be shared afterward?
We are, and it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. But if you've registered, I'll send through a link afterwards, so you can all have access to the recording.
We don't normally share the slides, do we? Just a video link, is that right?
Yeah, usually just the video link, but I think in this case, if you are looking for the slides afterwards, just message me, send me an email. I'll put my details in the chat below. And if you request the slides, I can send them through.
Looks like most people are here now, so thanks so much for joining today. Again, I'm Jonathan Prendergast, Technical Director from Business Renewable Centre, and I'm here with Bridget, our Project Officer of Business Renewables Centre, to talk about PPAs for business and councils in Queensland, but I'm sure we have people attending from other states in Australia as well, and around how to make electricity purchase work for you in terms of cost, sustainability, and community outcomes. We would like to thank the team at Queensland Treasury for inviting us to present today. This free training series and content has been developed by the BRCA with assistance of a grant from the Queensland Government, which aims to ensure the community is a fundamental part of the energy transition. Thanks for joining. Feel free to ask questions at any time by using the Q&A function. We hope to also have time at the end for questions. Every week, more and more organisations, public and private, large and small, looking to buy renewable electricity, motivated by cost, sustainability, and community drivers. And that is the topic of today's conversation. Acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge that today we meet on many Aboriginal lands, myself here on Darwal country. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, and we show our respect to elders past, present, and emerging through thoughtful and collaborative approaches to our work. About Business Renewable Centre. we support renewable energy procurement by organisations operating in Australia, especially via power purchase agreements or PPAs. We were established in 2017 with funding support from ARENA and the Queensland, Victoria and New South Wales state governments. We are now member-based and member-funded, as well as doing bespoke pieces of work like this one for the Queensland government. We're an independent and not-for-profit organisation, and we provide training, resources and know-how to support the industry decarbonisation via renewable energy procurement. We provide training, templates and guides, like we have RFP guide and term sheet guide for wholesale PPAs, for example. Connection, we provide consultant lists and markets and policy information like our annual market statement that we send out annually. Onto our team. Jackie McEwen is our program director, with Chris Briggs and myself as technical director. Bridget, who's also here with me today, project officer, and Rachel Cooper Kulkarni, who led great work on this Queensland project. Just a heads up before we get into it, we have a buyers boot camp on the horizon, 7th and 8th of May in Brisbane. So this is our annual event, 1.5 days for buyers to come and learn from go to woe everything about the national electricity market and power purchase agreements. A key thing we support is peer-to-peer learning. So we invite buyers faculty, those BRCA members who have done a PPA, to come as kind of mentors. And we have exercises on tables to sort of build those networks with new buyers and experienced buyers, and even like paired walks after lunch and these sorts of things. And we have lots of topics like Energy Markets 101, deal structures, RFPs, how to do PPA tender evaluation, negotiation, buyers groups, firming, wholesale PPAs, so derivative accounting and project finance and so on. We have many types of professionals that attend: energy, procurement, sustainability, finance, contracts management, CFOs, legal professionals, even comms and marketing people. And you can see a few photos from previous boot camps there. Today's agenda. So today you'll learn about PPAs, why companies procure PPAs, who is doing it and why, what are the PPA types, how size matters, and how group buying works. We'll have an industry presentation by Daniel on Cairns Regional Council's journey on their PPA. We'll discuss size options and group buying, how to deliver community benefits with PPAs and some case studies, and some time at the end for Q&A. So what is a corporate PPA? Who is doing them and why? So what are your energy management options? So we don't think corporate PPAs are the only energy strategy. They're part of an overall energy management options. For example, investing in starting by reducing energy use and deploying on-site renewables, and help to develop new local renewables, and then investing in high-quality renewable energy attribute certificates. So before we get into all of it, let's do a quick poll to see where everyone is up to. So Bridget's got the control of this one and can get it going. So which best describes your current off-site renewable energy procurement status? So not talking about rooftop or behind-the-meter renewables, but off-site. Are you totally new to renewable energy procurement? You're currently investigating options of what might work best. You are currently tendering or negotiating. You've actually executed a contract or green power or LGCs, or you've executed a PPA. Gives me a chance to have a sip of my water so my voice can carry on. Says I can't vote, but I'll give it a try anyway. No.
All right, Jonathan, that's probably enough time for people to answer.
Thank you.
So we actually have the majority of people are totally new to renewable energy procurement today. And we also have a handful of individuals currently investigating their options. And one individual has executed a contract for PPAs.
Fantastic. But great to capture many people at the start of their journey or at options investigations. I think this presentation will be very valuable, and also attending a boot camp if you can. Next slide, thank you. What is a corporate PPA? It's a contract between an energy buyer and an energy seller, whereby there is a guarantee that the energy being bought has been purchased from a renewable energy project, like an off-site solar or wind farm. The PPA is a contract for an agreed amount of electricity at an agreed price for an agreed period of time. PPAs support the decarbonisation of Australian businesses and electricity grid by providing financial certainty for renewable energy projects. Who is buying renewable energy via a corporate PPA? So you can see the graph there. That's the annual scale of corporate PPAs in Australia. I remember someone asking me at the end of 2018 if that was it for corporate PPAs, and they're now dead in Australia. And look how they've carried on after that point. And last year, 2024, was our biggest year yet, primarily due to two huge PPAs by Rio Tinto, but still quite an active year. Corporate buyers and public sector buyers are leading the way with PPAs, and Queensland is currently the leading state for corporate PPAs. The market was quite evenly split between wholesale and retail PPAs last year. And some of the buyers in 2024 were Equinix, La Trobe University, Digital Reality, Rio Tinto, and Telstra. So Queensland continues as the leading state for corporate PPAs. In 2024, you could see the total capacity of corporate PPAs was around 2,500 megawatts, which is around $3 to $4 billion worth of projects. So huge numbers by Queensland. And that was similar in previous years, you can see on the right. Part of that is project availability. There's many solar and wind farms that have been under development and are available for PPAs, whereas that's less of the case in New South Wales due to some planning and grid network constraints, and hoping to be solved in the future. What about in the regions? Who is buying renewable electricity via PPAs? Well, industrial and manufacturing, we've got Orica and Hunter and BlueScope down in Illawong, Illawarra, Sun Metals in regional Queensland, and Molycop in the Hunter as well. We've got many in agriculture and food buyers like Mars, Agricorp, Coca-Cola, CUB, with regional operations buying PPAs. In terms of mining, we've got Anglo American Weir and Newcrest Mining with a large PPA, wholesale PPA with the New South Wales wind farm Rye Park, which is now in operations. BHP have signed 5 PPAs with their mining in the regions. In terms of local government, we'll hear from Cairns today, the Central West Joint Organisation in New South Wales around Dubbo and Bathurst and Orange and so on. They signed a PPA. Singleton, Port Stephens, and many other regional councils. In terms of universities, Newcastle, Charles Sturt, Griffith, Central Queensland, and so on have all signed PPAs. And other industries like Ambulance Victoria, Barwon Water, Barwon Health, Geelong Port, and so on have signed PPAs. So it's not just a matter of city organisations, but also PPAs have been quite popular amongst regional organisations. About renewable PPAs, what is a renewable PPA? A corporate power purchase agreement is a contract between an energy buyer and seller, whereby there is a guarantee that energy being bought from an off-site wind or solar farm at an agreed price and volume and term. They're done for 3 main reasons: to achieve environmental sustainability targets. Maybe your organisation has a net zero target or 100% renewable target. A corporate PPA is a key part of achieving that. Can be done to manage price fluctuations. So you can sign a wind or solar farm with a fixed price because for, say, 10, 15 years because they're not exposed to international coal or gas or other variable markets. The prices are fixed and known over the life of the project. So therefore they can offer these fixed pricing. So if you sign up to them, that can steady your your electricity costs during the term of the PPA and provide more budget certainty. They can also do more than just green electricity. They can deliver social, environment, and economic benefits. So PPAs support the decarbonisation of Australian businesses and electricity grid by providing financial certainty for renewable energy projects. So one big appeal of PPAs is by the stroke of the pen, you can eliminate your Scope 2 emissions. So if you currently have Scope 2 emissions to a certain level, Scope 2 being for your electricity usage, Scope 1 being emissions you directly cause by like burning petrol or gas, for instance. So Scope 2 is electricity and Scope 3 is emissions related to yourself but accounted for by others. So if you've got your Scope 2 emissions, you could reduce those using rooftop solar and by achieving some energy efficiency. You might have some new demand due to your organisational growth. You have these remaining emissions after that work. You can use an offsite PPA to eliminate the rest of those remaining emissions and achieve your sustainability targets. Andrew Want has a question. Are other types of power production other than wind or solar ever included in a PPA? For example, waste to energy, geothermal, or solar thermal. It's certainly possible, and we've seen in the US they've more turned them to clean PPAs to include nuclear as well. And I don't want to go into that topic any further. It's discussed enough in the public. I guess it's just a lack of prevalence of waste to energy, geothermal and solar thermal projects. And also, there's an advantage of wind and solar in that once they're approved, they can be financed and constructed quite quickly with quite low technology risk. But with waste to energy, geothermal, solar thermal, because we have less experience, we haven't developed hundreds of projects in Australia yet, they suffer a bit more finance, technical and delivery risk, and that could take more time. So maybe they're less suitable for a PPA due to their technology maturity level at this time. But it's a great question, and it'd be exciting to see corporate PPAs used for those sorts of technologies in the future as well. So PPAs delivering great budget certainty. So in this graph, we show a straight line to illustrate your annual electricity budget if you're under a PPA, which is a fixed price. And the bars show what you would normally do in the past. If you're like tendering electricity every 1, 2 or 3 years, you have these short-term agreements, and your PPA rate may be under the price if you just went for a 3-year contract right now. And prices could go up, and your PPA might be at a great saving for your second contract from years 4 to 6. And then in years 6 to 9, if you tendered again, prices might be low and your PPA rates might be higher than if you had tendered at that time. We don't know exactly what your future prices will be because we can't predict exactly where the energy market will go. So the PPA is likely to be cheaper than your normal strategy at some times and more expensive at other times, but it does have that more certainty and reduces that budget risk. And with the nature of a transition, we're transitioning from a grid primarily supplied by coal for our bulk power to moving towards wind and solar. It's likely that volatility will continue in this energy transition, and we'll have market energy price fluctuations. The graph on the left shows where the predicted retirement of coal power stations like Liddell in 2023 and upcoming Yallourn and Callide B and Vales Point, and that we will be moving from, say, 20 to 25 gigawatts worth of coal power stations to 2 or even 1 gigawatt by, say, 2040. So it's a huge change, and that will continue volatility. And on the right is a graph of quarterly energy prices in the wholesale market. And you can see they had some changes since the year 2000, ranging from down to $20 per megawatt hour to $150 per megawatt hour. Then in Q2 2022, it went up to $260 per megawatt hour. So a huge change and unprecedented volatility, and that could continue, and a PPA can help protect your organisation from that volatility. And they're more than just procurement of green electricity. So if we think of the sustainability goals, things like ending poverty, zero hunger, gender equality, affordability and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, and so on, we can integrate some of these SDGs into our corporate PPA, and we'll speak to some of those case studies later. This chart comes from Salesforce in the US, where they wrote a report more than a megawatt. So not just getting electricity and renewable electricity from your PPA, but other benefits, biodiversity, employment, and so on. So we've got an exercise. Bridget, was this an online poll again, or something different? Yes, nodding.
Yeah, that's right. This is our second online poll, which I'm just about to launch.
Thank you. So it's good to have a think about what are your company's main drivers. Super important at the start of your journey for getting a corporate PPA, because towards the end, there'll be some nervous executives about signing this 5, 7, 10-year agreement when they're used to 2 or 3-year agreements. Why are we doing this again? And you can remind them, oh, we discussed this up front and we wrote it down. And it might be that, say, directive from the top, you're a multinational organization and they've said, hey, Australia, it's time to go 100% renewable. It might be about keeping up with the competition or a net zero commitment. Might be you're targeting staff engagement, that there's been questions from staff. Hey, other organizations similar to ours have gone 100% renewables. What are we doing? Rather than keeping up with the competition, you might want to be an industry leader, or it might be to manage costs because you've suffered from some of this volatility and looking at other options. So it'd be good to have a think about that, and you can choose 2 in the multiple choice.
So unsurprisingly, we have the most votes with managed costs and net zero commitments. And then we have a couple of votes for keeping up with the competition and industry leadership.
Thank you.
And one more poll to finish us off.
Thank you. What do you think would be the biggest challenge for your organisation to switch to renewables? Is it a lack of a business case or a lack of industry imperative? Just don't have the time and resources? You have other priorities? A lack of expertise in energy, or a lack of peer examples? Just trying to think which ones we can help with. We can help with the business case, the industry imperative, a little bit of expertise, probably rely on your consultant as well for that. And certainly a lot of peer examples. We've got lots of case studies, and we'll be showing some of those later. Is there a way of showing the answers at all, Bridget, or you can mainly relying on you to tell us?
I think we can show the answers. Would you like me to?
Yeah. I'm a visual person, a visual learner.
Can you see that?
Yeah, quite evenly spread, but time and resources is the number one. We can help a little bit. We can't give you more time. We can help you do sort of point in the right directions and save time to undertake your renewable energy procurement. All right, let's keep moving. So what sort of options do you have? Let's get into it. Here are the key renewable energy purchasing options. These are focused on options for smaller and medium electricity customers. So there are more options if you're a really large energy buyer, like a Telstra, Coles, or Woolies, or a BlueScope, and so on. These tiles come from our online diagnostics tool on our website, where you can input some data about your organisation, and it comes with a recommended option and some more details on those options. So we have on-site solar, switching to a green retailer using green power. You can go and buy LGCs, large-scale generation certificates. You can enter into a retail PPA with a retailer providing electricity from a wind or solar farm, or go direct in a wholesale PPA, direct to a wind and solar farm and sign a PPA, or be part of an aggregation or a group purchase. Here are the two primary types of power purchase agreements, PPAs. On the left, a retail PPA, on the right, wholesale PPA. Let's go back to front and do wholesale first. In a wholesale PPA, you have a contract directly with the renewable energy project, the wind or the solar farm, and you agree to pay a fixed price, and in return you get renewable energy certificates and the variable market price. So you might be paying $70 per megawatt hour and receiving $80 one month and $60 the next month, and this is done as a contract for difference. That wind or solar farm has to get financed and built, and then supplies renewable electricity into the grid, and that market prices flows through to the corporate buyer. Over onto the left, we've got the retail PPA, and rather than go direct to a wind or solar farm, you go to a retailer who manages all that sort of relationship with the wind or the solar farm and the renewable electricity, and just provides you your electricity and your renewable energy certificates, and you pay a fixed price. So they manage the portfolio and the variability of the market. That said, there are options where, as a customer, you do take on more variability in that sort of wholesale market pricing, and you firm it up with wind and solar PPAs. So wholesale PPA, also known as a contract for difference, they're directly with a wind or solar farm. They're separate to your electricity bill and physical consumption of energy, so you still need your retail contracts, and it sits on the side. They're variable volume, so they're linked to production, and wind and solar farm production changes for various reasons each year. They're priced as a swap, so you pay a fixed price and receive a floating price, and they're generally 10 years or longer. The transaction costs can be lower by avoiding negotiations with retailers and integration of retail contracts across site. They're generally suited to buyers with a load greater than 50 gigawatt hours per annum. So that's organisations paying, say, more than $10 million a year. The PPAs are used to finance new solar or wind projects, and it sits separately from your retail contract. So as I said above, you still need your retail electricity contracts, and you might tender that out every two or 3 years like normal. So under a wholesale PPA, it's this contract for difference. So we have like unders and overs. So in the graph, you can see the horizontal line is the PPA strike price, and the wavy line is the wholesale spot market price. So when that wholesale market price goes high, we have overs, and the generator pays the buyer the difference. So that means as an off-taker, you want the high prices in your PPA to get paid those overs. But if the market price goes low, the solar or wind farm gets less revenue, so you're required to come in and pay unders. So in a low month, let's say wholesale price is $40 and your PPA is $70, you have to pay them $30 per megawatt hour, the difference. That helps them have more steady revenues rather than variable revenues, so they become more bankable and can get financed. An example of a wholesale PPA is Newcrest Mining. I mentioned it earlier. They're Australia's lead gold mining company and also do copper mining, and they have a huge mine in Cadia Valley in Orange, which was the subject of this PPA. They signed it with Tilt Renewables in 2020, and it covers 40% of Cadia's projected energy demand for 2024, and a 20% reduction in their greenhouse gas emissions. It's a 15-year deal with Rye Park Wind Farm. It's the largest wind farm to be directly enabled by a PPA in Australia. At that time, we've had some larger ones since. And some of the quotes to kind of indicate their business case from Newcrest. This is a critical step in our transition to sustainable energy use at our operations. A part of our climate change policy released in last June, we've committed to a significant reduction in emissions intensity, and this agreement is a major step towards delivering on that objective. So, not sure if they've received a directive from above, but they might have some stakeholder support for reducing emissions, but noting they haven't gone 100%, but emissions reductions in this case to keep up with the market. And for the owner of the wind farm, the long-term offtake with Newcrest would underpin the investment decision for its largest wind farm to date by Tilt Renewables. Thanks, Bridget. Retail PPAs. So via a retailer, the retailer acts as an intermediary between the buyer and the renewable energy project. It's integrated into the electricity bill and connected to the physical consumption of energy. So they become your retailer. They're generally 5 to 10 years, and the costs can vary with the level of firming. If you want fixed price for 10 years, you have to pay a bit of a premium. But if you allow repricing or you become a more wholesale exposed customer, then the pricing can be cheaper. They're generally suited to buyers with a load greater than 5 gigawatt hours per annum or paying more than $1 million per year. And it replaces your retail supply contract for the portion of electricity that you connect. Some retail PPA case studies, winemaker in South Australia, Pernod Ricard, 100% renewable, and it includes Jacobs Creek and St. Hugo wine brands. They signed a retail PPA with Flow Power in 2019 to 10-year deal that includes supply from Mannum Solar Farm and Clements Gap Wind Farm, with a load just over 20 gigawatt hours. In the same year, the company installed 100 kilowatts of solar and 3 megawatts of solar on site as well. The combination of this and the PPA covered 80% of their load. For Molycop, they're a very large industrial player in New South Wales. They signed a retail PPA with Flow Power for 100 gigawatt hours per annum, so quite a large one for a retail PPA. 10-year deal with supply from Bowman Solar Farm near Wagga and Sapphire Wind Farm in New England. And it's a spot exposed PPA and covers around 50% of their annual electricity consumption. Finally, Borough Foods in Victoria, they're an ingredient processor, and they signed a 10-year deal with Flow Power with supply from the 240 megawatt Ararat wind farm with annual savings in excess of 20% and is used in the real time to offset grid electricity consumption. 90% of Borough Foods energy supplied by renewable energy sources. Thanks, Bridget. And now we get to see the great presentation from Daniel. His face just appeared a moment ago and he disappeared again. I'm sure he's about to come back. Thank you. So Daniel is the Energy Management and Sustainability Advisor of Cairns Regional Council, has been for some time, and he's going to present on their PPA journey with some great insights on PPAs in Queensland and in particular the Ergon network. Thank you, Daniel.
Hey, thanks very much, JP. Thanks for having me again. So yeah, I'm just going to be giving you a little bit of an overview of our renewable energy journey, which has sort of culminated in us entering into a PPA arrangement, which we're now entered into this financial year. So move on to the next slide. Thanks. So as Jonathan mentioned, there's multiple drivers for why businesses might undertake this, choose this alternative, one of which is the sort of environmental driver, trying to reduce emissions and achieve, net zero targets. So in 2022, Council released its climate change strategy for 2030, and one of the actions within that was that Council had committed to supplying our electricity from 100% renewable energy. Okay, next slide. So in terms of how we use electricity and where we sort of sit in that sort of discussion around the size of the business, we use, well, this is sort of a couple of years old now, but it's been pretty consistent for the last few years. We use around 35 gigawatt hours of electricity per year. So that's 35,000 megawatt hours. And that costs us around $9 million each year. And you can see the sort of breakdown of how we use our electricity. Like a lot of councils, we're also a water utility. So a lot of our water electricity is associated with our wastewater treatment and also our wastewater supply. Okay, next slide. So electricity is our biggest sort of energy consumption. We also have quite a lot of electricity emissions and cost associated with diesel for our fleet, and also a little bit of unleaded. So we have another about $2 million associated with fuel use. And that's something that we would look to electrify as electric vehicles and trucks become available. Okay, next slide. So we started on a renewable energy journey through installing solar at council behind the meter on our own building. So that started back in 2007 when we installed it was 900 watts, our first solar system. It cost $15,000. It took a couple of electricians 2 days to install it, and it made the paper. So, we've sort of been, obviously since then, electricity, solar panel prices have come down a lot. And so that's our smallest system. We've now installed up to 600 kilowatts. As you can see here, this is a ground mount system at one of our wastewater treatment plants. And between that 600 kilowatt system and another 100 kilowatts on the roof, we have 700 kilowatts, which is enough to supply about 30% of the requirements of that particular facility. And across all our assets, we have about 3 megawatts of behind the meter solar installed. And that's saving us, varies every year depending on tariffs, but it saves us over $500,000 a year. Okay, next slide. So at the moment, we have about 10% of our electricity supply coming from solar. But the question is, what do we do about the rest? So we did look at other options for producing more solar at other facilities, but we've kind of, we have a few more opportunities there, but not enough to fill that gap. We also looked at waste to energy and also microhydro, but all those options didn't really stack up very favorably from a business case point of view. But what became apparent to us a few years ago is that we now had an option to purchase renewable energy from the grid. So we began looking at this in earnest in 2017 when we looked at options to, purchase electricity locally. Back then, there were a few examples of local governments doing this. So Sunshine Coast Council had built their own solar farm, and also the Melbourne City Council led a buyers group to purchase renewable energy for, I think it was 14 organisations in the Melbourne City area. And so those sort of projects were really underway in 2017. Also locally, we had the Mount Emerald wind farm was built near us. And I did reach out to find out where that electricity was going and to see if there was an opportunity for us to sort of purchase that. And all of that electricity has been purchased by Ergon, and they've signed up to a long-term offtake agreement. So back in 2017, I also, I started looking at this sort of plot here, which is produced every year, which shows who's buying electricity via a PPA. And you can sort of see the sort of how this sector has grown. Back in 2017, a lot of the conversation was around bespoke agreements, and there weren't that many retailers offering a retail PPA. But now they're very much more standardised sort of product. So in this graph here, you can see Cairns Regional Council gets a tiny mention over a little dot at the top of 2022 when we signed an agreement. Okay, next slide. So one of the other key drivers around that time was realising that the cost of renewable energy was steadily declining and was becoming the lowest cost source of energy. And the question we had was, well, how do we access that? Because I had reached out to, looked at options such as green power or purchasing LGCs via Ergon. And those were very expensive options. We were looking at a premium of around an extra $1 million in order to buy green power or LGCs to cover our energy load. And obviously that's sort of really not going to fly with council. Next slide. So in 2018, we engaged some consultants to assist us with sort of really understanding what sort of PPA models were available and what sort of prices we might be able to get and how that compared to what we're currently paying. And so we basically undertook a rates assessment and a feasibility study. We looked at different options for what PPA might suit us. And that came back as looking like there were, well, what we really learned from that is that a retail PPA was the most appropriate option. And there were a number of retailers available who might be able to offer that. And the rates were very favourable. So it certainly led us to dig deeper. The other thing is that I was looking at this electricity generation map, which is produced by the Queensland Government, and that shows all the current and proposed energy generation projects in Queensland. And looking at that, I could see there were a number of projects proposed in our region. So the timing seemed good that we could potentially enter into some sort of deal where we could purchase locally, which would certainly tick the boxes of, supporting the local transition to renewable energy. And then in 2019, we joined the BRCA just soon after they formed. And I also attended I think it was the first PPA boot camp. So I'd give that a big plug to everybody who's thinking about this. The boot camp is a fantastic way to really get into the details and really understand this, what a PPA is, how it works, what the benefits are, what are the risks, and be knowledgeable enough that you can then really share that information with your executive and councillors or whoever it is you need to convince. It's a good idea.
Thank you for
And
your kind words, Daniel.
sorry?
Thank you for
Yes.
your kind words.
Yeah. And that's where I met Jonathan too. And it really is fantastic learning experience. So one of the other things we did was we undertook a market sounding in 2020 where we reached out to retailers to find out what they could offer us, where they might be able to supply us energy from, and give us indicative pricing. What we found was we got back offers that were structured differently. So we needed specialist consultant support to help us to basically model out the different options and then provide us with some sort of apples to apples comparison. Okay, next slide. So just to clarify what we're talking about here, when you get your electricity bill, there's a lot of different sort of cost components. And when we talk about a PPA, what we're talking about is choosing a retailer who can provide you with wholesale electricity and also the LGCs, which are the environmental charges. And that retailer will be passing through to you the costs associated with the poles and wires for the network transmission costs. That's fixed. What the different retailers can offer you are different prices for the wholesale electricity, the retail component, and the environmental component. However, the only exception to that is in Queensland. So if you're currently with Ergon Retail, then you'll be paying prices that are set by the Queensland Competition Authority. And those prices are set such that people in regional Queensland pay the same as if you're in southeast Queensland. And so some regions of Queensland really do benefit from what they call the community service obligation subsidy. So if you're out in Western Queensland, the cost of providing that transmission is very high. And so there's quite a substantial subsidy to supply you with that electricity. Whereas if you're on the east coast of Queensland, the actual difference in transmission costs is actually nowadays it's quite negligible. So if you leave Ergon and you pay the true transmission costs, maybe little to no cost penalty. So anyway, it's just something to be aware of, that if you're thinking about this and somebody's doing modelling for you, they really need to also factor in what is the impacts on the transmission costs if you're an Ergon customer and you'll be moving away from Ergon, because only Ergon Retail can provide those regulated tariffs. Okay, next one. So yeah, this is where I've been talking with quite a few councils and businesses who are in sort of regional Queensland. And so that's where this sort of issue is important to understand, because if you're in the eastern regions, you don't really need to worry too much about the additional cost impact of the network costs. But if you're in the western regions, then the cost impact could be quite substantial, and it might sort of really erode the benefit you might otherwise get from the lower wholesale energy costs. Okay, next slide. And that, by the way, that map that I just showed you just sort of indicates what sort of zone you're in, and therefore that indicates what sort of wholesale price, what network costs you'll pay. So in presenting this, we're having this conversation with the council, particularly with the CEO and the CFO. One of the things I sort of wanted to point out was the variability in cost we had paid historically. Where with Ergon, so we pay the tariff set by the QCA, and they're probably a little bit buffered from some of the volatility some other customers who aren't on the regulated tariffs might experience. But nonetheless, we've seen this quite a lot of volatility in pricing over the years. And this breakdown here shows you the energy cost in blue and the network cost and the certificate costs for the environmental credits. And you can see there that it's the blue energy costs that are the big impact on that price variability. The network costs have been fairly stable. Okay, next slide. And as Jonathan mentioned, he showed you before a graph that showed you the volatility in wholesale pricing, because it's this wholesale pricing that obviously affects those energy costs that feed through to the customer. And you can see our electricity prices have been quite stable, but in the last few years, they've become quite volatile. And that last big price spike you can see there, that was back in 2022, back when we were still in the process of doing this sort of analysis for our council. And you can see prices got up above $300 per megawatt, which is huge. This is for the wholesale price for a quarter. So thankfully, since then, they've actually come down. So they're sort of, you can sign a contract now, which is sort of prices are certainly going to be closer to 100. And this graph here is just showing you how the cost of electricity at different times of the day has been changing over time. So as we have more and more cheap solar feeding into the grid, it's causing the cost of wholesale energy to drop in the middle of the day. So there'll be in certain times of the year, in the middle of the day, electricity costs will be negative. But counter to that, once the sun sets and there's less of that energy available, it's being provided by coal and gas, and that's comes at a premium, and so electricity prices spike in the evening. So it's important to kind of understand this underlying wholesale electricity situation, because it does have an impact on how expensive it is to supply you with electricity. And if you go to a retailer, they need to understand how you use electricity, because if you're a customer that uses a lot during the middle of the day, when electricity price is cheap, it's cheap for the retailer to supply that energy for you. But if you use a lot in that evening period between 4 and 9 o'clock, then it's very expensive to supply you with that electricity. Okay, next slide. So hopefully this doesn't confuse everybody too much, but this is really just like one of the earlier slides that Jonathan presented about the retail PPA. So basically you have the retailer in the middle there who's purchasing electricity from multiple sources in order to supply you with electricity at any point in time. As a customer, just to be clear, actually, as a customer, we've actually typically signed with the retailer is what they call an electricity supply agreement. And then the retailer on your behalf is the one who actually signs the PPA with one or two or maybe more renewable energy projects. So the retailer will sign the PPA with a project to supply you with electricity at a particular from a particular source, and they'll allocate a certain portion of the electricity from that wind farm or solar farm to you. So at times of day when the wind's blowing and the sun's shining and you're using electricity, that electricity is coming from those projects. But at night time, when the sun sets, the wind stops blowing, the retailer needs to supply it from somewhere else. And so they may have a number of different options of how they do that, but typically they're going to have to be purchasing electricity from the national electricity market at wholesale prices in order to supply you with that electricity. So the important thing to realise here is, I guess, is that it's important to understand how you use electricity, because the retailer needs to know that to then determine how they're going to supply you with the electricity, whether or not most will be able to come from a wind farm or a solar farm. And then they get an idea of how much they're going to have to supply from somewhere else, such as the wholesale market. And that has an impact on how expensive it is to supply you and how much certainty there is around the price. Because the electricity they buy from a renewable energy project actually can come at basically at a fixed price, and that's known into the future. Whereas the cost of electricity from that wholesale market is very volatile. Hopefully that made sense. So when we went to the market for the purposes of our doing our market sounding, one of the things we needed to supply to the retailers was information about how we use electricity. So what's most important to be able to do this is that you need to have what they call smart meters installed on any site that you're thinking to buy renewable energy for. So what you can see in this particular picture is information taken from all of our large sites, where I took smart meter data for an entire year. And so that's, a lot of rows of information, supplied that information to the retailer, and we could, this is like an aggregate load profile from all of our large sites, showing the way we use electricity during the day between midnight and midnight. So you can see for all of our sites in aggregate, the electricity is sort of lower in the middle of the day and then spikes in the evening. Now, you can also see how it changes with the season, with typically the summertime being when we use more electricity. And what's quite notable here is you can see the January, the grey dotted line is at the highest line in the middle of the day. That's showing you the month before we turned on our solar systems. So in January, our electricity consumption in the middle of the day was quite high. Then as of February onwards, it dropped right down. That's because we'd installed 1.8 megawatts of ground mount solar. So that sort of meant that our electricity use in the middle of the day was a lot less. So having gathered this electricity data together, I could feed that to the retailers we're talking with, and then they could actually work out how much it's going to cost them to supply us with electricity and give us some indicative pricing. And what's important to note about this, I guess, is what ideally to get good certainty around price, if you have a good match between the way you consume electricity and the way it's been generated from a renewable source, then the better the price certainty you can get. And typically that means you'll get lower, better value as well. So what this graph here is showing is the blue line is what I just showed you in that last slide. That's showing you council load on average throughout the year. And if we wanted to buy that volume of electricity from a solar farm, we would have to, so for example, that's the solar generation graph there shows you sort of this synthetic prediction of what the solar generation would be. That's basically, if we want to buy the volume of electricity we need, we would be getting an oversupply in the middle of the day when that's available, and then we would have an undersupply once the sun sets. And during those times of oversupply and undersupply, the retailer is going to have to either be selling or buying electricity on our behalf in the wholesale market. And so there's volatility associated with those pricing and uncertainty. On the other hand, we had information from a local wind farm that showed the way wind energy was being generated. That actually showed quite a nice sort of match between when we needed the electricity and when the electricity was generated. Okay, next slide. So having undertaken all this sort of initial work, what we knew is that we were particularly interested in buying electricity that was coming from a wind farm. And we looked at what was happening around us. At the point in time we went out to tender, there were 2 potential projects in our area. that we had been sort of keeping abreast of. One of those got approval to go ahead. So we chose to release our tender when we knew there was a local project we could buy from, and we also thought we'd see what else was out there. So we went out to a public tender seeking offers for a long-term PPA for 100% renewably sourced electricity, and also the LGCs to make it renewable. And we wanted that agreement to be underpinned by generation from projects in Queensland, and preferably projects in far north Queensland. And recognising the importance of that good match between the way the electricity is generated, the way we're using it, we also put in there that we wanted to be buying from projects with a generation profile that matched our load profile. So we received 7 tender responses. They offered different pricing structures, and so we required specialists sort of assistance and analysis to be able to really compare the financial value and risk of the different offers. Next slide. And so in the end, we have now signed an agreement with CleanCo Queensland, which is a Queensland Government corporation, and that's to supply us with 100% renewable electricity to our 76 largest facilities. And the electricity and LGC prices are fixed for the term. So this is a great offer in terms of providing us that price certainty into the future. The majority of electricity is coming from the Caban Green Power Hub, which is just near Ravenshoe. Based upon all that analysis that I discussed with, mentioned before, we expect that we'll have roughly about 76% of the electricity will come from the wind farm that we use. And this project's being delivered by Neoen, who are a major international developer. Obviously, with a lot of these projects, there are concerns about the environmental impacts as well. So one of the things we were specific about asking in our tender was information about the environmental impacts and what measures will be taken to remediate the site and minimise impacts. So that's certainly something that was considered as part of our assessment. Next slide.
Daniel, I'll let you talk to this slide. So, but I had a couple of questions for you. But I was waiting for you to reveal the great result of your PPA before.
Yeah. You betcha. Sweet. So that's just a quick picture showing you where the Green Power Hub is. You can see that Cairns is the closest port. So next slide. And so the turbines all came through our port. A lot of local contractors were engaged in the sort of the process of the building of the farm. So there's certain economic flow and benefits for Cairns, even though it's not actually in our LGA. Next slide. And so in terms of economic benefit, certainly there's a fairly high value project in our region. There's lots of construction jobs for far north Queensland. The developer have also established a mechanism to sort of share local benefits. And so that includes a neighbour benefit sharing scheme and a community benefit fund. And also they had in place a local participation plan that set targets around local employment and also Indigenous employment. Next slide. And in terms of the question that's probably most on council's lips at this point in time, now that we're kind of in a cost of living crisis sort of stage. So this here is showing you the expectation what we'll be paying this financial year versus what we've paid historically. So you can see that sort of volatility in price over time, and then you can see what our future trajectory looks like. And this has all been applied CPI, so that we're looking at real dollars. That's why the price is flat moving forwards, even though the actual arrangement does escalate with CPI. And you can see that what we're paying this year is less than what we've ever paid historically. And that's for 100% renewable energy. And if you take a close look at the last green column and the blue column next to it, that is showing you the cost in this current financial year of paying the Ergon regulated tariffs versus what we're paying with CleanCo. So you can see there's a very substantial differential this financial year. We're looking to save over $1 million. And
Fantastic.
what the
Great.
future holds, who
Really
knows?
brings it
But
home.
it's a great result for now. Yeah, in terms of reaching 100% renewable energy, we're looking to, if council, continues to commit to that renewable energy target, then we'll need to purchase additional LGCs to cover the portion of electricity that's still coming from Ergon, because only our 76 largest sites with Glencoe. So we're going to continue to install more solar and look at battery options. We're looking to electrify our fleet. So far we have 4 or so EVs. And of course, a really important point is to remember that efficiency is always still important. Okay, and that's it for me.
Thanks so much, Daniel. So many questions have flooded in while.
Oh, great.
Andrew asked, why did you request 100% renewable power and LGCs? That's more a clarification, I guess, of what you asked
Yeah,
for.
sure. Well, look, I mean, I guess the thing is that it's 100% renewably sourced electricity, but you do have, if you want to make a claim about using renewable energy, you have to purchase and surrender the LGCs that come bundled with that electricity.
So a similar question is, what is the difference between buying green power and a retail PPA? Both are through a retailer who is buying wholesale renewable energy from a supplier, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it comes down to price, right? Because if you buy, like if you go to Ergon and you buy green power, say, I think it's around about 6 cents per kilowatt hour premium that you pay for it, which equates to 60 megawatt hours, just for that cost, that premium. But you're still paying the cost for your underlying electricity is still the same as what you're paying anyway. So by the PPA, you have the opportunity to sort of lock in the lower cost electricity that is coming from a specific project.
I think green power is more of a month-by-month proposition, isn't it? Or maybe over 1, 2, or 3 years. Whereas a retail PPA is a term contract. It's 5, 7, 10 years. And that helps, going that extended distance helps bring down the cost of the electricity and the LGCs to the extent that it can be cheaper than just black power in a short-term agreement. So that's a real benefit, as shown in Daniel's graphs. On the other side of the equation as well, if you're the supplier and you've got this customer for 10 years, it allows you to go and make investment decisions because you know you've got this demand for the next 10 years. You can go and build a wind or a solar farm or a battery or something like that you couldn't do if all your customers are 1 or 2 years. So I'd say they're the main differences, the cost and the term. In a retail PPA, you often get to specify where the LGCs come from. So you have that direct linkage with that wind or solar farm. And what a great story that Daniel, their LGCs are coming from that local wind farm. We've got a few more slides to get through before we get to the rest of their questions. I think we should get through those first. And if Daniel, if you can hang around till 2:30, so we can go through some of those questions together, because it's good for them to hear from not just me, but you as well. So size is a big issue in terms of helping corporates decide which is the best model for them. So very large energy buyers can buy huge volumes of energy, like 200 gigawatt hours plus. And that means an over 100 megawatt solar farm, and you've got cheap project finance coming into the mix of $100 million. And they can get very competitive wholesale PPAs. Whereas at the smaller end, it's not really directly helping a finance from that one deal. It's more multiple deals that help. So less about financing a new project for those large projects, and more likely option is going to be more a retail PPA for those for smaller energy buyers. And when it's a small or medium energy buyer, sometimes they're a very large organization. They just don't use that much electricity, like an insurance company, for instance, that has thousands of employees, but only some tenancy at offices. Right, next slide. Thanks, Bridget. So group deals are a way of making smaller buyers into a larger, bigger buyer and achieving some of those benefits that come from being a bigger buyer, whether it's increased purchasing power, You can get more bids, more tenders, or sharper pricing, or maybe you can get more impact. You can help support a new wind or solar farm, like one of the case studies later. They do come with some challenges. Different organisations have different objectives. You've got to bring those together. You've got to establish governance structures. You've got to be facilitating communication. So you've got to fund and have budget for a facilitator to help everyone work together and keep it moving forward. There's a lot of internal stakeholder management at each organisation, and it brings in a certainty of success risk. For example, if you're controlling your own destiny, you control whether the whole thing goes ahead or not. Whereas if you're in a group, you're reliant on the others continuing for the project to succeed. Next slide. Some case studies. So I mentioned this one earlier, the Central West Joint Organisation. They used to be called Centroc. They include many councils in the west of New South Wales, out near Bathurst, etc., and Orange. They undertook a group deal, 58 gigawatt hours. 3 councils chose to be 100% renewable, 8 councils 50%. And it was 78% of the large sites and street lighting loads for those organisations. And they reduced the region's emissions by 20,000 tonnes of CO2 per annum. They signed an 8-year deal with Iberdrola, a very large renewable energy company with retail operations. And that got supply from some local projects like Bodongora Wind Farm near Wellington and Flyers Creek Wind Farm, which is under construction at the time in Blaney. Another group deal, this is quite an interesting one, where Lion are a very large buyer. They anchored the deal with Engie, the retail PPA, and they invited, via the Australian Hotels Association, dozens of pubs and to join them on that deal. So it was like a supply chain power purchase agreement, and it decreased the electricity prices on average for those pubs from 11.5 cents per kilowatt hour down to 6.9 cents per kilowatt hour for the energy portion of the bill. So reduced they achieved savings of 40% per annum, connected to the 120 megawatt proposed Silverleaf solar farm. Community benefits and PPAs. So as discussed earlier, PPAs are not just about energy and not just about renewables. They can achieve other benefits. We released a best practice guide, which established 3 principles. Principle 1 of a good PPA for best practice is to support decarbonisation of the grid, and that is primarily by supporting investment in new wind and solar. So it gets built and generates clean energy, reducing emissions. Principle 2 was supporting further decarbonisation. So is it associated with storage or maybe demand management and shifting loads and so on? Principle 3 was, does it support social, economic and environmental benefits in addition to its electricity supply and renewable energy credentials? So you can read that guide and find it on our website. An example of that is Westpac's PPA. They signed a 10-year PPA with Bowman Solar Farm in Wagga, and they have an ongoing partnership with the solar farm's owner, Spark, $1 million in local community support annually for the term of the project. That supports education, local biodiversity and vegetation regeneration programs and local youth support. The agreement included local employer and supplier spend outcomes during construction and multi-use options for the site, including grazing of sheep. The site ground cover was selected to support the sheep grazing and also local native bee population. And they had a major tree planting initiative around the solar farm to also support biodiversity. An amazing thing they also did was that 75% of the construction team were local, 15% were of Indigenous heritage, and over 50% were from long-term unemployed situations. So it really gave a leg up to local unemployed or Indigenous local workers to get all their safety cards so they could work on a construction site and experience building a solar farm, to give them a step into the construction industry and experience so they can work on future solar farms or other roles in construction. Bowman Solar Farm also purchased supplies from 90 local businesses, accounting for $12 million of direct spend in the local economy. And they had an industry-first Women in Solar initiative with 12 local women employed and TAFE trained to work on the solar farm construction. Some other examples. So an affordable electricity for the whole town. So Hayshire Council in New South Wales and Ongi have developed this scheme and they're working with the community to gain support for an energy transition in the Southwestern Renewable Energy Zone. And they have 8 renewable energy developments that are proposed for the Hayshire Council, including hybrid wind, solar and battery developed by French developer Ongi. Despite its large scale, local community opposition to the project has been minimal, and the council worked with Ongi and the community to identify meaningful outcomes for the community, including cheaper electricity. So the idea is a $1,000 rebate per annum for 30 years has been negotiated for anyone in the town of Hay and living within 20 kilometres of the project. So it's a fantastic outcome that they can benefit from cheaper electricity in that town. Community fund governance. So for Dulacca Wind Farm in Queensland by Octopus Investments, it's a 43 turbine project owned by Octopus and located near the Western Down region of Queensland. The project will deliver a community fund valued up to $1.25 million to fund community groups, projects and organisations via annual funding grant rounds. Importantly, the community representatives will be on the funding panel, meaning the community has a say in funding allocation. So 2 great case studies. We also have another guide just released for industry, which helps renewable energy projects and their developers self-assess their ratings. So it's to raise the bar and set the standard for renewable energy project delivery on environment, climate, community and organisational goals. So they can do self-assessment to see how they perform against environmental and social criteria, includes many case studies prepared by ourselves, ERM and WWF. And it's a self-assessment tool across 11 parameters against the ECCO goals. Here's just a snapshot of some of the community benefit scorecards for tendering from that tool. Thank you. I think this is our final section and we've got 18 minutes to go, so some time for questions. What are some of the challenges that hold back PPAs within organisations for corporates and businesses and councils? One is this term length, that you're used to 1, 2 or 3 year contracts, and these are 7 or 10 years. They're longer term contracts and they usually come with better prices, but PPAs represent a major change from the standard 3-year contract and often hard to get CFOs over the line. One thing we do to help advise with this is don't get caught in this pure cost discussion, because we can't know what the cost comparison will be in 2028, where the energy market, where retail prices will be at that time. So it's more about risk management and budget certainty. In terms of environmental claims, so having to decide whether to sign with a lower risk operating project or to support a new project, and around retiring LGCs, because it can fundamentally change your business case. Some buyers sell LGCs. They sell the LGCs from their PPA for the whole term or partially to help the business case stack up of their corporate PPA, whereas others retire them from day one to meet their targets and emissions claims. Next is on cost, and I've sort of already discussed that, of more of a rounded pitch. So we can't know where the price will be in 2028, so more about risk management. And finally, project risk. So if you're contracting directly with a developer, most projects suffer delays for one reason or another. They come with complications around planning and delivery and commissioning. And this can affect a corporate PPA works directly with a wind or a solar farm and linked to it if it gets delayed. A benefit of a PPA is you don't pay until it's built and operating. You only pay for the power as it's produced. So you're not paying money if it's been delayed, but it does delay, say, your sustainability goals or opportunity costs that you might be missing out on some high energy prices, or you might be utilizing it to manage your energy market risk and you're missing out on that if the project is delayed. Time for Q&A. So we've got many great questions. Daniel is hopefully around to help me answer some of them. Andrew asks, our large market sites contract is up for renewal now. We think we need 12 to 18 months worth of consulting work before going to market for a PPA. Does this mean we can't sign a PPA until that contract ends? I say the sooner you sign a PPA, the better. You don't need it to start next month or the month after. You can have it starting in 1, 2, or maybe even 3 years' time. And your contracting before that can be just typical 1, 2, or 3 year contracts to get you to that point. So, no, the sooner you start, the better. If you sign early, it allows the retailer to maybe even go and firm up their wind and solar and other supplies in time, gives them time to finance and construct new things. Daniel, shout out if you
Yeah, I was just going to say,
yeah.
I mean, we awarded the tender for our PPA in I think it was August 2022, but that was for an arrangement that was going to start until July 2024, which is when we so basically the wind farm was still in construction and the time that we signed the deal.
Julie asks, if an organisation is expected to have a large increase in electricity demand over the next decade, how can this be accommodated within the contract for a PPA? Firstly, I'll discuss wholesale versus retail. So if you sign a wholesale PPA with the wind or a solar farm, you're buying at a certain volume, and that's what you get in terms of LGCs especially. But it doesn't affect the agreement if your demand changes, because you've still got your retail contracting separately. And that is an appealing part of wholesale PPAs, that it's not linked to your demand, so you can go and sign it and it sits separately, so it's a bit more flexible. Whereas with retail agreements, they do need to know your demand, and if it's changing significantly, they need to know. If you're signing, say, a 20,000 megawatt hour per annum retail PPA or any retail agreement, and you're expecting to go to 40, your retailer hasn't gone out and purchased that power on your behalf, so that they'll want to reprice your electricity agreement, because they'll have to go and buy an extra 20,000 on today's prices. Now, if today's prices are higher, that's going to be at a higher cost. If today's prices are lower, that could be at a discounted cost. So you could use your existing retailer for that extra 20, or do it under a separate retail agreement as well. So 2 options there. The LGCs will be the tricky part. If you're trying to be 100% renewable, you can't commit today to buying the 40,000 megawatt hours, then you'll have to buy the extra 20 at that time when you have more certainty at the market prices at that time. Daniel, any additional comments?
Yeah, the other thing I'd say is that the retail agreements that that we saw and the one that we've entered into do have a degree of flexibility. So we can have a change of load of plus or minus 20% before it triggers a repricing. And the other thing is that there's also there's another trigger for a repricing, which is a change in load shape. So if we were to start to use a lot of electricity at a different time of day, then that may have an impact on, as I showed you, the cost of providing us with electricity and how much actually comes from the wind farm and solar farm versus somewhere else. So there's a couple of mechanisms within our contract where that may trigger a repricing. One of which being a massive, a significant increase in our load.
Andrew comments that it seems like private sector sign PPAs with the private sector companies, whereas public sector sign with publicly owned gentailers. Is that a fair assumption? I've never thought of that before. And I think it could be partly true. There's a degree of comfort by council, state organisations that comes with a CleanCo or a Snowy that they feel more comfortable about. So that's possibly true. What do you think, Daniel?
Yeah, I'd say definitely. I mean, because we'd always been with Ergon, there was a certain discomfort with stepping away from Ergon, but moving to another Queensland government corporation kind of, I think, gave council a degree of comfort that they were going to, be around for a while
Um,
and be a reliable counterparty.
with this Queensland focus as well, I mean, there is a lot of government ownership of energy companies in Queensland, so there's a bit of that happening as well. But yeah, interesting observation, Andrew. Thank you. He also asked, does Ergon do retail PPAs? Because normally Ergon's like a distribution company, and in the southern states, they don't really provide retail offerings, but they do retail energy supply in Queensland, don't they, Daniel?
Yeah, look, I mean, we just, important to recognise there's two different companies that are actually ring fenced. You have Ergon Network, they supply the poles and wires, and then you have Ergon Retail, which, split off from Ergon, this two split into two a while ago. And Ergon Retail don't offer anything other than the QCA regulated tariffs. So they don't offer PPAs, and I don't know if they have intentions to, because of the fact that CleanCo is the sort of Queensland government business who's tasked to do that.
Fantastic. Julie asks, are there many retailers that offer renewable PPAs under loads of 5 gigawatt hours? I could only find Flow Power Momentum. I think many of them do Smartest and I'm going to get in trouble for not remembering someone. Origin, Red, others provide various forms of retail PPAs. CleanCo would do under 5 gigawatt hours, I think.
That's because when we first approached CleanCo, they were advertising that their target, and what they said to us is that their target customer had a load of around 50 gigawatt hours a year minimum. And so when we went to them with a load, around 20, 25, they sort of said, well, you'd be our smallest customer, but we'll consider you. And they obviously took us on. And initially, they only wanted to serve large consuming sites, those sites consuming more than 100 megawatt hours per year. But then during the course of negotiations, they decided they were willing to, take on more of our sites, which were smaller consuming sites. And in the last conversations I've had with them, they've said that, they're thinking that they'll be applicated to even smaller customers again. So they're certainly, I think, interested to provide electricity to particularly councils and smaller organisations around Queensland.
Thanks so much, Daniel. Yeah, so for an anonymous question, for a renewable PPA that only supply when renewables are operating, do the typical PPA include who will be supplying the energy when they are not producing, or will organisations have another agreement for power in these periods? So if it's a wholesale PPA, their run of plant, if solar farm makes 10,000 megawatt hours 1 month, that's what you get, and if 5,000 the next month, that's what you get. And then your retail electricity might be with, AGL Origin or Shell or whatever, and that's sort of financially firmed by their portfolio. If you're in a retail PPA, you don't really see where that sort of residual 20 to 30% comes from necessarily. It just comes from the NEM, the wholesale market, where everything is intermingled. The idea around 100% renewables in corporate PPAs, that over the course of the year, you're producing enough wind and solar, or you're buying enough wind and solar to match you over the year, acknowledging that at sometimes you'll have more renewable energy than you're using, so you're selling to the market, and other times you'll have a shortfall and you're buying from the market. And there's some corporates investigating 24/7 renewables where they look to close that gap a bit further and get some more from like that standard 70 to 80% matching, more up to 85, 90% and so on. I might try and race through these, Daniel, but if you did have...
Yeah, the only thing I'd say about that, like, again, I mean, I'm most familiar with CleanCo, but in their situation, the sort of residual amount, like in our case, we think it's going to be about 15% that doesn't come from either the wind farm or the solar farm that have been specified in our contract. That 15% comes from their foundation assets. So they're basically the hydro power stations, like the Wivenhoe pumped storage hydro, and there's the Barron Gorge Hydro and some others in Queensland. They own all those assets, and also they have a gas-fired power station in Gladstone. So that's where they source the remaining electricity from when needed.
Kania asks, has there been any thought about a percentage of First Nations supply of renewable energy, or has the main focus of Indigenous participation been jobs in supply chain procurement? I think you're discussing First Nations owned renewable energy, and that is something that certainly ticks some of those boxes and achieves some of those objectives around best practice and supporting social and other goals beyond just renewable energy. I don't think they've been done to date. But have been, I think First Nations owned renewable energy projects are under development at the moment. They're sort of first ones and something that corporate PPAs can support in the future. And yeah, just to reflect on that Bowman solar farm example, I know of some of those Indigenous workers that went on to work in solar farms at like Narrandera, the Avonlea solar farm in Narrandera. So really, that's by a contractor, Beon, in Victoria. So Beon's really made a great go of employing Indigenous workers on solar farms. And I remember when the Victorian government released a reverse auction where they were going to sign PPAs with multiple wind and solar farms around Victoria. Maybe it was just solar farms that particular round. All of the solar farms went to Beon to be their contractor, because of their credentials around community engagement and Indigenous participation. So whilst I think Beon started this initiative of employing sort of this social initiative around who they employ, it's turned into a real competitive advantage for their business and been great for business, because now they can pick and choose which projects they work on. An anonymous question. I know that Iberdrola Australia can also supply load following LGCs for less than 5 gigawatt hours per annum. It's not linked to a single name project, not a retail PPA, but they can supply LGCs from the renewable portfolio. Other retailers can also provide green power for smaller loads, but green power tends to be more expensive compared to LGCs. Thank you for answering that, anonymous. Julie says thank you as well. Julie says that Origin, Smartest and AGL told them that 20 to 25 gigawatt hours minimum. I looked into it a couple of years ago. Yes, worth asking them again, because it's a rapidly evolving sector. Henry asks, is there any development on 24/7 CFE PPA? I think there's investigations happening. Google did a PPA in Europe where it got to like 91% 24/7. So, and that was a combination of solar, wind, and battery storage. So that's great to see. And maybe Daniel's is 24/7 because CleanCo has pumped hydro. What do you think, Daniel?
Yeah, look, I think so. I mean, but then they do also have the Gladstone, as I say, the gas-fired power station that would sort of be providing a little bit of extra boost at certain times.
Thank you for asking all those questions, attendees, and for your active participation in this webinar. We'll wrap up now. On to the next slide. So a reminder, we have that PPA boot camp on the horizon. Please get in touch with Bridget for any questions about that. I think there was one more slide, wasn't there? So there's our contact details for any questions you have. Please get in touch. Thank you so much, Daniel, for presenting again on Cairns Regional Council's corporate PPA and contracting.
Pleasure.
The complex business case being in Queensland and Ergon and everything that came with it.
Very nice. Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thanks for all attendees today for coming. You hopefully can see where to find us if you have any follow-on questions. And thanks for all those that asked questions and participated so actively today. Have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Catch you later.